Hello, good morning, welcome to the Sunday Supplement. Coming up on today's show, it's Alisson Blunderland at the King Power, but Liverpool, they survived to win their 4th Premier League game on the spin. Manchester City, they celebrate 10 years of ownership under Sheikh Mansour. There's no sign of Leroy Sané yesterday in their 2-1 victory over Newcastle at the Etihad. And we'll be talking about the greatest manager in the world. He's in charge of one of the greatest football clubs in the world. Well, we've got 3 of the greatest football journalists in the world with us this morning. Oliver Holt, he's the chief sports writer at the Mail on Sunday. Jonathan Northcroft, he's football correspondent at the Sunday Times. John Cross is the chief football writer at the Mirror. Morning, guys. Good to see you. Thanks for coming on. Don't forget to tweet the show at Sunday Sup. The best will appear on your screen over the next 90 minutes. Just keep them clean, OK? The back pages of the papers this morning, then. The Sunday People dominated every paper. 6 papers dominated by Manchester United this morning. Steve Bates says that Mourinho's fate at Manchester United as the manager will be decided on their Champions League campaign. Of course, they drew Juventus with Cristiano Ronaldo playing for them. They'll play them in the Champions League group phase. His future decided on Champions League football, according to Steve this morning. The Sunday Mirror, it's all gone wrong. This is over the Ronaldo transfer. He could have come back to Manchester United in the summer. Ed Woodward wanted him. Jose Mourinho, his relationship with him in bits after their spell together at Real Madrid. Mourinho didn't want him back at Old Trafford. That's according to Simon Mullock this morning. Jonathan's paper, the Sunday Times, ahead of that game against Burnley at Turf Moor this afternoon. Jose, we're not good enough to play the Manchester United way, reflecting on Sir Alex Ferguson's golden period, those 13 Premier League titles under Sir Alex back in the day. I warned you, this is Mourinho talking about his summer warning to Ed Woodward, the United executive vice chairman, that everything wouldn't go well this season for Manchester United. A special hunch, that's the back page of the Star this morning. He did warn the United fans in the summer that he was struggling to get this team together. Sunday Express this morning, Paul Pogba, I want to leave United. He wants to go back to Juventus. That's according to the Sunday Express. A transfer story as usual on the back of the Express this morning. Sunday Mirror's football pull-out. Tap-in headline this. Alisson Blunderland. It had to happen. It did happen at the King Power yesterday. But Liverpool did survive. Ollie's paper, and Ollie was at the King Power yesterday. Jeepers keepers, that mistake by Alisson. But Liverpool going on to win their 4th successive Premier League game. They're still top. You chose to go in and talk and write about that mistake at the top of your match report this morning, Ollie. They made a big change in the summer by signing Alisson from Roma. He was one of Liverpool's statement signings. But the way that they play and the way that Liverpool are set up to play, was this a mistake that was always in the making?
I think it probably was, and Klopp talked about it fairly openly afterwards and said it was always going to happen, and now it has happened. It's not going to happen again. And I think they will learn from it. I think that was Alisson's style. I still think that he's a great signing. He's already made a difference. Their defence, partly because Van Dijk is there as well, looks much different to the way it used to be, and clearly they'd reached a point where they knew they weren't going to sustain a title challenge with the goalkeepers they had. I think with Alisson they will be able to sustain that challenge despite yesterday. Look, I mean, actually one of the other takeaways from yesterday was how well Joe Gomez played in central defence. So I think Liverpool's defence in general is looking a lot better, but clearly it was an eye-catching error yesterday, and I think it always was coming. I mean, we saw the nice little dink he did over Knockaert against Brighton the week before, but I think, as Klopp said afterwards, there's a time and a place, and maybe on the pitch yesterday, it was a dry pitch, it was a bit bobbly, not the time to do a attempt to Cruyff turn on the byline. But I still think
Trent Alexander-Arnold could he have helped him, because he could have dropped off and shown.
Yeah, they could have. I think again, Klopp made that point afterwards that you've got to offer him. You've got to offer him an option. It's an interesting debate, though, isn't it? Because we're all, I think, the keepers who try and play out from the back now have become our darlings in many ways. You know, we were eulogising Pickford for doing it. One of the reasons I think that Southgate picked him probably for the World Cup. It's a new style. It's a kind of way, I think, forward in terms of you can start a move with the goalkeeper now rather than just end one by hoofing it into the stands. And I think it's much better to watch, but it comes with risks, and that's what we saw yesterday. Again, from Liverpool's point of view, the fact that they didn't crumble after it, because it would have been easy to crumble. I mean, Johnny was there as well. Leicester played well. I mean, Leicester Leicester are a good side, and they played well, but Liverpool and the crowd were right up for it, particularly after that error. But Liverpool hung on.
I thought the story of the game, I've discovered that Johnny rode down to the King Power yesterday.
On my bike.
On your new bike. Well, the story of the game for you, was it Alisson's error? And Ollie just touched on Liverpool's performance yesterday, that it is exciting, it's exhilarating to watch. But can they win a Premier League title playing this way?
Oh, I think they can. I mean, I guess one of the stories from that point of view was it wasn't Liverpool's best day. Leicester were pretty good, as Ollie said, very energetic. They've got some really good footballers in the team now, and they caused Liverpool a lot of problems. So it was a bit of an ordeal, and the King Power is somewhere that Liverpool have come unstuck in the past. You know, it was an ordeal in the sense of playing a good team. They make a mistake and they hang on to win. I thought the other point for Liverpool was they tried Henderson, Milner and Wijnaldum in midfield. It just didn't quite work. I think you could see why Naby Keita's necessary. With Alisson, one of the interesting things was Klopp's reaction afterwards. I mean, he was quite firm about it, saying, you know, it wasn't cool, it won't happen again. And I always got the sense that when Karius was there, he was trying to protect Karius a little bit. He was always very kind about Karius, whereas he felt with Alisson he could lay down the law. And that to me, says that Klopp thinks that he's a stronger character mentally than Karius. And actually, Alisson did come out himself afterwards and hold his hands up properly. So, you know, there's a sense that it was good to get that out of the way, that mistake. Klopp said it had been coming, and move on. I mean, Ederson made similar mistakes last year for City, put them behind him, and we all thought he was a great keeper, and I would expect Alisson to do the same.
Yeah. Crossy, why is Klopp so reluctant to talk about Liverpool's chances of winning the Premier League title? They invested so much money in the summer. Was that a question of trying to keep up, trying to maintain their place in the top four and guarantee finishing in the top four to play Champions League football? Or was it a genuine attempt to say, OK, we need to have a crack at this, we can have a crack at it?
Well, I think he's trying to play it down for two reasons. I think he sees that Man City last season was so far ahead of the rest. I mean, not just points-wise, but on every level. I mean, they were absolutely fabulous to watch, weren't they? And they're miles ahead of the rest. And I just think that Liverpool have no doubt in my mind at all on their way to bridging that gap. And the other point is, I think, why he's trying to play it down is when you spend as much money as Liverpool did this summer, you immediately ratchet up the pressure on yourselves, don't you? And I think that Liverpool are still going to be the outsiders. I think that Liverpool have an outstanding chance to win the title this season. They're brilliant to watch, aren't they? Really entertaining. Yesterday's game, I mean, you know, I watched it and it was a fabulous sort of 90 minutes of football, really rip-roaring, great entertainment. I still think that sort of Liverpool might just have a few flaws. But as we talk about sort of Alisson, I mean, the defence is so much better. You've got the two full-backs, you know, really exciting young players on either side. Joe Gomez, outstanding. Maybe Van Dijk has, you know, finally found a partner to really make Liverpool look strong. And say what we like, but I mean, Lovren, you know, is a backup player who reached the World Cup final. So I think they've got sort of strength in depth. And Alisson, for all the sort of the finger pointing that we could do, and he got away with 2 against Brighton, it's easy to forget that he made a game-changing save against Brighton, didn't he, to make sure that I don't think would have been made by either of the other 2 keepers last season, to make sure that Liverpool won and took 3 points last week against Brighton. So I do think he's an outstanding keeper, but I do also think he's a very big guy, isn't he, and making Cruyff turns is not going to be so easy for him as it is for Ederson. But I think it will develop the Premier League into a 2-horse race, possibly 3 with Spurs. And I think Liverpool will push City all the way for various reasons. I love the way that they play. They're fearless. They're great going forward. If they can find the right balance in midfield to protect the defence, then I think they will take some stopping Liverpool. And I also really fancy Man City to be strong. I mean, they've got a great group in the Champions League. So if they do get distracted, I think Liverpool are the ones that can kind of sneak up and perhaps sneak the title from them.
Yeah, Chelsea in that mix as well, aren't they? Of course, because they've had a great start too. They won again. Yesterday. But Ollie, what do you sense, as having watched them yesterday, is the prevailing mood around Liverpool and this team? Reaching the Champions League final last season, and OK, they did lose to Real Madrid, but did that give them the incentive, the impetus and the realisation that they're a pretty good team?
Yeah, I think there's an incredibly positive mood around Liverpool because Klopp is a very positive manager. I mean, one last thing I was going to say about Alisson, I think Johnny, it was a very good point that Johnny made. I mean, I think he's a different calibre of keeper to Karius, for instance, and I think the point that Johnny made about the fact that Klopp wasn't afraid of sort of being quite firm about that mistake yesterday. I don't think there's any air about Alisson of the fact that he's going to collapse and become a liability. He's an asset, I think, and he will learn from that, and it's just a case of adapting. But I think Liverpool are, the one thing that we look for in teams is progress, and I think Liverpool are progressing all the time. I mean, I think the one rider I would say, and I think Liverpool fans would accept this, is that they, for all the fact they've won their first 4 games, in some ways it's more impressive because they've not quite looked as sharp up front as they did last season. I mean, they were magnificent up front last season. Salah's not quite as sharp. Yeah, for me, so they're winning games without being at their best, which I guess is a dangerous sign for the rest of the league.
Who, in terms of goalkeepers, guys, what is the perfect? What's the perfect goalkeeper? In terms of the criteria, the attributes, the values that they have? I mean, if I went back, I'd probably say Cech's the best goalkeeper I've seen in the Premier League era. I think 15 goals did he concede in the first season under Mourinho when they won the title. Yeah. Is that the bar? Cech in sort of 05 to 07, that sort of period?
Cech's a good example because within his time, which was pre the age of sweeper keepers, so he didn't have to do any of that. He was as good as it gets. But what he had and the great keepers had was the aura, the kind of, you're just not going to beat this guy sort of aura that Schmeichel used to have, and I think De Gea on his day has now, but he's maybe he lacks the sort of ball playing capabilities that some of the modern guys have got. If you speak to an old goalkeeper, they'll just say keeping the ball out of the net. And I think the point with Alisson is he's a very, very good goalkeeper. I mean, made good saves yesterday, actually. So despite all the other stuff, or aside from all the other stuff, and he came for crosses, first and foremost, he does the basics right. So I think the basics are still the basics. But it is an asset, as Ollie says, if in the modern age you can play a little bit as well.
If you ask defenders, they will want the ball-playing goalkeeper. It's not a question of being worried or intimidated about sometimes being played a dangerous pass, because it's far less dangerous than the old-fashioned goalkeeper. Well, I say old-fashioned, we're only talking a few years ago, who pumps it long, and you 50% of the time you will concede possession and invite pressure back on yourselves. It's a totally different thing. You speak to fullbacks at top clubs and they will want the goalkeeper playing it short. They will want that. And, I do see some people sort of, from a different age. We've moved on. Football changes. That's why we suddenly went through a sort of a phase of 3 at the back and sort of had different tactics. And, the sweeper, for example, I mean, that seems from a different age. But that's why I think
Mourinho brought it back on Monday night.
Well, exactly. But, I mean, I feel that I agree with you. I think Cech is the best overall goalkeeper.
What about Alex McCarthy?
Yeah, well, absolutely. Actually, back in the squad, yeah. Got the call while I was interviewing him. But he was, and deserves to be back in. Well, played well yesterday, didn't he? But I feel that overall, if I had to look, I mean, I think David De Gea is the best goalkeeper in a classic sense. He's not playing particularly well, I have to say, at the moment. But if I look for one goalkeeper that encompasses everything, so a really good goalkeeper, good shot stopper, really comfortable with his feet, and also the sweeper keeper, I think if you look for everything that encompasses that, I think it's Hugo Lloris at the moment, because he ticks all the boxes and, he's at a very high level, I think, on all things considered. And I think Ederson, best sweeper keeper, David De Gea, best shot stopper. But if I had to look for someone that does everything, it's Lloris.
Yeah. I mean, the other point is it's got to be, it has to be someone that works with the defence as a unit, as part of the unit. Yeah. And you think the great goalkeepers, they were part of a 4 or 5 or whatever it was. And the point Klopp wanted to make was that the defence have almost got carried away with how good Alisson is on the ball. And he felt they were giving him the ball too much. And if you look at the goal, it's a bad pass back to him, and then nobody moves. As you say, Alexander-Arnold could have made an angle. I think Gomez could have made an angle, but there's a sense, we'll just knock the ball back to this guy, and he's so good, he'll dribble out, he'll do something. And Klopp wanted to make the point that, I think he said he's not the solution, he's just an option or whatever. Yeah. So it's part, for Alisson to be a top number 1, him and the whole defence have to be on the same page.
Yeah, well, Liverpool spent big money to bring Alisson in from Roma over the summer. Of course, Chelsea spent big money to replace Thibaut Courtois with Kepa. Kept a clean sheet yesterday in Chelsea's 2-0 victory over Bournemouth. Chelsea's start is almost under radar, isn't it, Ollie? They've had a very good start. There's that sort of almost invincible feeling about them, but they perhaps haven't been given the credit for that perhaps they merit under Sarri. What's changed there? In terms, we talked about Liverpool's mood and the optimism around there, but the change from Conte to Sarri seems pretty seamless.
It does. I think it's a very obvious thing to say, but obviously one of the main thing is that Conte's gone, and that air, the thing that happens at Chelsea, that recurrent theme of, a great season, exultant season followed by a season of internecine squabbling, which that developed into last season, sadly at Chelsea. The fact that that's gone and that there is a breath of fresh air and a new guy's come in with a few new ideas, but that have, as you say, it's been seamless. And I think it was good to see Hazard score yesterday, and because I think that he remains crucial to any Chelsea season. I think he has the potential always to be the best player in our league, and we haven't quite seen that the last couple of seasons. But I think if Sarri can manage him correctly, play him correctly, then he could be the best player in our league this season.
I know it's early, guys, but Crossie's talked about teams that can challenge for the title. When I look at Chelsea's midfield of Jorginho, Kante and Kovacic, those three, if you're underpinning a team and building a title-winning team, that's one of the strongest, toughest, hardest midfields to break down, isn't it?
Jorginho, magnificent.
Brilliant.
Just doesn't give the ball away. I mean, he's absolutely fantastic. It says something about Jorginho's qualities that it almost feels like Sarri has changed Kante from the best, and he has, without doubt, in my mind, been the best holding midfielder in the Premier League for the previous 2 years. He's now become a more, sort of all-encompassing number 8, all over the pitch, to almost bring out the best in Jorginho, which I have to say, I look at him and sometimes it reminds me, not just in build, but in the way that he never gives the ball away, always wants the ball, always there, always available to help out a teammate, to Guardiola. I mean, he strikes me as a sort of very similar player to him. Yep. It's a totally different way of playing. Chelsea are brilliant to watch. Why I think they sneaked under the radar a little bit, for me, is that no one expects them to win the Premier League. Whether we'll have to then revise that in October and November remains to be seen, but they're super to watch, to watch.
Definite contenders. I mean, they don't have the Champions League to distract them. I think Kovacic and Jorginho, arguably two of the best 3 or 4 signings in the league, and we didn't hype them up at the time. But to get Kovacic from Real Madrid and Jorginho is an example of a player that just fits a manager's philosophy, and he can penetrate as well. And then Pedro looks like the Pedro of old. And then I agree with Ollie that Hazard is one of the best players in the league, if not the best on his day. And Sarri is just patently an experienced manager, doesn't really care about pressure, and kind of ideal for the nonsense of Chelsea.
Yeah. Move over, Cara. Move over, Gary Neville. These boys know their tactics. They're enjoying their tactical chat this morning. OK, next up, we're going to talk about Manchester City and 10 years of Sheikh Mansour. OK, let's talk Manchester City. Another win for them yesterday against Newcastle 2-1 at the Etihad. But it is 10 years since Sheikh Mansour took over at Manchester City. It's reflected in the papers, reflected on the back page of the Mail on Sunday this morning inside, all about the man that they really wanted. They wanted him all along. Pep Guardiola, some amazing statistics in terms of number of points, number of goals, possession. We'll get on to Guardiola in a few moments' time. But I'd like to, in terms of context, 10 years of Sheikh Mansour, is it a bit like the moon landings? Where were you when Neil Armstrong landed on the moon? Is it one of those moments when Sheikh Mansour bought Manchester City?
Yeah, it was a little bit. I mean, I was covering City at the time. They were starting to get on their way. I mean, they had Shinawatara's money and they had Sven, and they were starting to spend properly and trying to. They had a brush with glamour, but it wasn't quite working for them. And I remember when the takeover took place, there was a guy called Suleiman Al Fahim who was fronting it. He was this kind of exuberant kind of TV personality in the Middle East. And although all this money was pouring in, it did rather seem like this is another ridiculous chapter in you know, the Manchester City's history. This will be another sort of blind alley. And of course, the first thing they did was sign Robinho. And again, that seemed, there's all the stories about how he thought he was joining a different club in Manchester. It just seemed another City farce. But very, very quickly, Al Fahim was sidelined. And City got serious, and it didn't take you long to realise that something quite profound was happening. And I think the story, you know, there's two parts to the story. There's the way they built over the first 4 or 5 years towards that first title under Hughes and then Mancini, and it wasn't always sort of thrilling, but they were signing good players like Aguero and Silva and company. And then the Barcelona lot arrive, you know, Begiristain, Soriano, and finally Guardiola, and have taken the whole thing to a different level. And you know, I think if you look at the history of football, so many rich men have wasted their money in the game, and City are an opposite story. It's a lot of money spent, but it's money well spent, I think. And they've almost become a model for how to do things.
And the way they planned to get Guardiola, I think, as well.
Long-term.
You know, they went with a long-term plan. They got as you say, they got the Barcelona guys in to begin with. They laid the groundwork for it. They waited for Guardiola. They did everything. Whereas I think you contrast that with the planning of maybe some other clubs, which smacks a little bit of hand to mouth and no long-term planning. I think that City regime are reaping the rewards of that now.
Yeah. Crossy, do you ever look back wistfully at another time, nostalgically, at football from another era, before Mansour's money, before Abramovich's money, back in 2003 when he bought Chelsea? Claudio Ranieri, incidentally, is on Goals on Sunday next. Of course, that's the manager that Abramovich inherited at Chelsea when he bought the club. But do you look back dewy-eyed at previous eras, before the big money rolled into town?
Well, I guess you do, because maybe the Premier League was perhaps a bit more open. But what I would say is that generally, even up until, say, Abramovich turned, you know, changed football, I think, in 2003, I do think you generally finished where your wage bill was in terms of the league. So if you spent, basically, you had the highest wage bill, it would take something remarkable for you not to win the Premier League or the old First Division. That's how it was, basically. So we are kidding ourselves to a degree to suggest that money has completely ruined and changed football. It's always been there. If you look at the era just before, it was always Arsenal v Man United for the title, Wenger v Fergie. Well, those two were also vying, you know, who had the highest wage bill. So we can romanticise absolutely.
Famously.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, those two guys at the top wanted to be the best paid manager because they thought that they were the best, and frankly, that filtered down throughout their contracts. And so we can romanticise about sort of how Arsenal did it under Wenger, or how, you know, it was different under Man United. But Man United were winning titles because they were the biggest club in the world. They were, you know, obviously, without debate, 99 they won the European Cup. They were the best team in Europe, and frankly, they were a global monster as well. So, you know, I think it's wrong to be so disparaging about it. To my mind, Roman Abramovich changed English football, and he has done so much for English football because he raised the bar. I realise there'll be, you know, supporters of every other club going absolutely crazy at this point and saying, we completely ruined it. Well, he ruined it because, you know, your team isn't going to win so much anymore, and then Chelsea are raising to a new level. But I also think that, similarly with Man City have not just raised the bar in terms of football, they've bought some brilliant global stars, absolutely fabulous football, great football to watch, particularly under Guardiola in this last year, but they've also done wonders for the local community, I think, and they've changed the area in which they are based, and that's why I've got a degree of sympathy for all Tottenham's farcical, you know, stadium things. I mean, they've planned it badly, but ultimately it'll be really good for the community. So they've gone wider than that, and I think that deserves a lot of praise. I think City are fabulous, you know, great thing for English football.
I agree. One idea that makes me laugh, though, as well, is this idea that City were a small club before Sheikh Mansour came in. You know what I mean? grew up in South Manchester. I used to go and watch City. If you talk about being dewy-eyed, I'm slightly dewy-eyed for Main Road, but I love Main Road.
Me too.
But, you know, times change, and we are in a different era now. But City, I mean, City have always, well, have been a big club for as long as I can remember. And the other thing that annoys me about the way that the whole Sheikh Mansour story is treated is that you know, City fans have sort of jumped on some bandwagon. City fans in Manchester have a reputation for being had a reputation for being some of the most long-suffering fans in the country. I mean, maybe that mantle has been assumed now by a big club like Leeds or something like that. City were that club. City were a joke. They were a joke insofar as they were famed for their misfortunes. They were famed for, you know, Alan Ball's team playing the ball into the corner because they thought they were going to be safe, and in fact they were going to get relegated from mishap after mishap after mishap. And people will say there's no such thing as fans deserving success, but City's fans suffered for a long time. They stuck with their team through thick and thin, and now, you know, they're reaping some rewards of having a benefactor who's actually pumped a lot of money into the club and turned the club into something that is admired the world over.
Is there a permanence about it, John? When you drive to the Etihad campus, when you park in the academy, in that area, the stadium and everything that's surrounding it, does it feel permanent?
Oh yeah, it does, and if we're talking about money well spent, you know, that's a big part of the story, that they've properly invested in the bricks and mortar. And then you look at them being part of this worldwide City football group. You know, they've almost got world domination in mind. I mean, there is a darker side to the story, and it slightly chills me when I think of the permanence, and that is what Sheikh Mansour and what Abu Dhabi are in it for. You know, and I want to separate the football. When I think of City, I want to separate the football from that, which I love. But you have to also recognise that these guys are here to get good PR for what's not a particularly pleasant regime. That's the whole point of them, is to advertise their country. I think Sheikh Mansour's only been to one game in 10 years. That's not a guy on a romantic football journey. You know, Abramovich is much more a football fan than that. You know, this is a guy who's in it for PR purposes. The PR's been unbelievable because the football's unbelievable. But we now have documentaries on them. We have a well choreographed 10-year celebration in the papers. That's all great, but I do think we've got to remember that the guys behind this are doing it for certain purposes, and not say just because the football's lovely and Guardiola's lovely that, oh well, they're great as well.
Is that possible? You're talking about the human rights issues. Is it actually, in your mind then, is it actually possible to separate the two? One, the football, all the money that they're pumping into this football club to make them great, to have Pep Guardiola, to transform the Premier League, European football and the landscape. But, oh, hold on a minute. Well, what about what happens, what about your own country?
I think, as a football reporter, I think that's something we're having to struggle with generally, you know, because we've just been to the World Cup in Russia. And we tried to separate what was a fabulous football tournament with Putin and why we were there in the first place. We're going to go off to Qatar soon and have the same dilemmas. You look at PSG and you know, you can focus on Neymar and Mbappe, or you can think about workers' rights in Qatar. It's a difficult age, actually.
It is a difficult age, and I think we are right to be queasy about some of those issues that you've just mentioned. But there's also a situation where no one is innocent. I mean, be queasy about Abramovich. Let's face it. I mean, where's that money come from? We can be queasy about the fact that, sure, we were queasy about the fact we were in Russia and we all had a great time, but we're aware of what that of some of the things that regime stands for. Equally, I think there are issues where everybody celebrates in the Western world when the USA, Canada and Mexico are awarded the 2026 World Cup, and that's held up as a great alternative to being in Russia. But then we look at the regime in the US and say the way that law enforcement agencies treat unarmed black civilians and the murders that are happening there. So the problem that I think we have as sports supporters is where do we draw the line? Tennis players go and play big tennis tournaments in the Gulf. People go on holiday to Dubai in their tens.
And they don't think twice about it.
In their tens of thousands. So, absolutely, we can be queasy about the regimes who own these clubs. But where do we draw the line? Do we stop people going on holiday to?
I guess the question would be whose job is it?
Yeah.
Is it our job as football reporters, sports reporters? Is it our job to test that regime, or is it the job of others? Is it the work
I
of
think
others?
we have examined it, to be honest. I do think. I mean, Man City. I guess there's been so much sort of kind of gushing, and partly so the praise has been heaped upon them this weekend. But I thought that some of the coverage for Russia ahead of the World Cup, for example, I thought it on news pages and indeed sport, I do think there was a lot of examination going on there. I mean, we'd be fooling ourselves if we didn't think that basically there's been so much written about Qatar. I think some of it has been a bit over the top, because I guess it has been a global game. But we also have to get to the crux of the issue about workers' rights. So you have to balance that.
What's been over the top about Qatar?
Well, I just feel that sometimes you have to sort of say that, shouldn't we take it? Shouldn't we take it worldwide? There is that counter-argument. Yeah. But no,
So
what I'm saying...
Workers.
Oh, no, gosh. I mean, you have to balance one against the other and examine the two and balance the two. I mean, surely, politically, if you feel that it's completely unworkable, and many people do, about workers' rights, well, there's a very good reason why then, I guess, not just the country, where it should be staged, but whether the World Cup should be getting there. And I guess that's a conscious issue. Well, exactly, that's a conscious issue for FIFA, isn't it? But to suggest that that papers and the media generally don't examine toughly.
More whose job? The question I was posing was whose job is it? Our job as football writers, sports reporters, or is it something that we happily pass over to news guys?
I'm not sure it is. I think that is the point. I'm not sure it is, but I think we also live in an age where newspapers are cutting back on staff, and one of the biggest sort of pools that's shrunk is that of foreign correspondence. It's very expensive to have a foreign correspondent, and my paper and everyone's papers, I think, have shrunk their foreign coverage. So, I think as football reporters, we'd love that to be specialists in our papers who are focusing on these things, so we can focus on the sport. But a lot of papers don't have them anymore.
I absolutely don't think it's something that should be ignored, and I don't think it is ignored. But I mean, I think that. I've seen, I think Marina Hyde wrote a piece in The Guardian about City ownership, certainly that was touching on the City ownership very recently. There have been, there's quite a good documentary out about the City ownership. There have been, Matthew Syed, I think, has written about Abramovich's ownership of Chelsea, and that's constantly referred to. Everybody is aware of that, but again, where do you draw the line? We have an Olympics in China. The Chinese regime has lots of human rights issues. Where do we not go and watch sport in a country where we have objections to that regime? It's a difficult issue.
Yeah, it certainly is. OK, we're going to move on next. We're going to cross Manchester from Manchester City to Manchester United. We're going to talk Hegel. More coming on that coming next. Welcome back with us this morning, Ollie Holt, Jonathan Northcroft and John Cross. Let's just remind you what's in the papers this morning. Alisson Blunderland, Ollie and John were both at the King Power yesterday to see this mistake by Liverpool's new goalkeeper, but they did win their fourth successive victory in the Premier League. They're still top, but the papers are dominated by this man. 6 back pages or front pages of the sports sections, the group of death. Steve Bates says Mourinho's future will be decided on the Champions League campaign. All gone wrong. They could have signed Cristiano Ronaldo. Jose Mourinho didn't want him in the summer. They fell out spectacularly at Real Madrid, of course. I warned you. This is Mourinho's warning, or telling Ed Woodward, or reminding Ed Woodward that it was going to be a difficult summer and a difficult start to the season. And Paul Pogba, he wants to leave. Of course he does, according to the Express. He wants to go back to Juventus, the team he originally left Manchester United for. Wants to go back there in January. He's told Manchester United that he is off, Crossy. Should we go right back to the beginning? Always the best place to start when you're wondering where to begin. Let's go back to Monday night. the catastrophic defeat against Tottenham, but according to Jose, it was a tactical triumph and a strategic triumph. Was it?
I don't know where he got that from. I mean, it was remarkable. It did feel like, you know, you look back upon as a football reporter, basically your moments of the season, and it was certainly one of those, even though it's come so early, because, I mean, I have to say that I did feel that United actually played well for 35 minutes. I mean, it could have easily been 2-0 up. They certainly should have scored through Lukaku. And then Tottenham, last 10 minutes of the first half, turned it on. And then in the second half, the way that United collapsed after Spurs scored their first goal was horrific, I think, and it would be embarrassing for any manager. So where on earth Mourinho then feels he's on safe ground to come into the press conference and basically say, I was so happy with the performance. It basically wasn't like that. We played so well. We were the better team, both tactically. I was happy with the performance. It's just beyond me. I just thought it was remarkable. It really struck me as I sort of sat there in the Old Trafford press box watching him sort of plod away, how he stood in front of the Stretford end, desperately reached out and got a scarf, and then basically tried to, you know, do some sort of PR with the fans and engage the fans as if there was some desperate act of a manager, you know, trying to keep the fans on side, trying to win that. And then in the press conference afterwards, I mean, it was just remarkable. I do think that it was going okay. And then I think Ian Ladyman from the Mail asked him about, do you know your best back four? And basically suddenly the volume turned up and Mourinho got really narky and went on to a different level. Perfectly fair question, by the way, and a good one. But Mourinho just completely lost it with everyone in the room. And the way that he exited with people sort of shouting him afterwards, reminding him about how he'd said the previous day, you know, how it wasn't all about me, turning it into everything about him, telling us about how he deserves respect because he's won more titles in the past than anyone else. And again, there he was on Friday in his pre-match press conference, bringing up a philosopher that I'd never heard of, sorry, Jose, and then basically saying it was about the whole picture. That's his point, isn't it? That basically judge me on my whole career. Well, he's never afforded in the past that sort of respect to rival managers. He's always been quick to dismiss and be rude about other managers for, you know, how you can't cling on to previous glories and be, you know, dismissive of kind of Wenger, Conte, Ranieri, call it who you will, and basically being rude about them. And I just think that, honestly, the last two press conferences, the post-match and the pre-match, makes Mourinho look a demented, angry, desperate figure who has lost his powers. No wonder he got irked about the Spurs supporters chant about "you're not special anymore," because when he behaves like that, I'm afraid he isn't. He's lost something along the way. Jose was special in that first spell at Chelsea. He was magnificent. I think obviously he did wonders with Inter. Went to Real Madrid, and I think something damaged him along the way. He won a title at Chelsea, but midway through the season, in that second spell at Chelsea, he's behaving now like he was back then, and I'm sorry, but he's going to self-combust at this rate.
If ever there was a clip that was designed to go viral on Twitter...
or a man enjoying himself.
Well, no, I'm a huge admirer of Mourinho, but he's not the manager that he was. And so for him to try and, you know, stretch back and say that basically judge me on my previous successes. I mean, it's beyond parody, it's beyond irony, because it's that man that pings everyone else for living on previous glory. I can see you walking into the press room at Watford this afternoon saying, judge me on my previous back pages.
Imagine if you didn't love it. Well, we know a few journos over the years who've done that.
Well, yeah.
Should we name some names?
I might have to refer to some of those recently.
Yeah. Crossy, your favourite philosopher's got to be Wenger, isn't it?
Well, of course.
That modern-day contemporary philosopher.
Of course, football philosopher. He wins every time.
Got to be Wenger. You were there. You were there on Friday for the Mourinho press conference. It was Ian Ladyman again, wasn't it?
It was.
Was Mourinho trying to belittle Lado, who's one of our favourites, of course comes on this show? Was he trying to belittle him by mentioning Hegel?
It was. I mean, Cross is right, by the way. You know, he's lost what he used to have, and among those things, he's lost control of the agenda. That's one of the striking things to me about Mourinho.
But you can't control it if you're losing games, can you?
Exactly.
When you're winning, you can say anything. When you're losing, you can't.
So that persona, the special one doesn't work when your results aren't special anymore. We're seeing that. He's lost his authority. And Friday was another example. So, on Monday, clearly he arrived at Old Trafford trying to project happiness. There was a kind of very saccharine interview beforehand where he was, smiling in that kind of slightly forced way he does when he smiles. And then he lost it at the end. And Friday was the same. He came in trying to be upbeat, grinning away, a couple of jokes. United tried to move the press conference on very, very quickly. So every TV questioner had one question only, and then it moved on to the next one. And they were clearly hoping to get through another 8 or 9 minutes without mishap. And he was asked a question that was a complete open goal. The question was something like, exactly how much do you love managing Manchester United? It was that kind of, simplistic. And all he had to do was say something nice about Man United, instead of which he said, well, I'm at one of the greatest clubs in the world, but I have to say I'm one of the greatest managers in the world, which just opened the doors. And then it was Lado who said, are you still one of the greatest managers in the world? And that presses his button, because he is upset about the praise that we lavish on Pep and Klopp. I mean, I believe on a personal level, it really irks him. And it did so again. So he did, his way of trying to come back at Lado was to belittle him over philosophy, but Ian said, I don't read any philosophy. Let's get back to your record. So it was a joke that sort of fell flat. If he wanted to put Lado in his place, all he did was came across as a sort of bitter and slightly mad bloke again.
This isn't going well for Jose. Ollie?
What,
save him. Of all the people to save Mourinho.
No, I mean, it did almost make me laugh out loud when he started asking for respect, because, as John has alluded to, this is a guy who called Arsene Wenger a specialist in failure and took a great delight in belittling people, and has said probably some of the cruelest things I think I can remember managers saying about opponents. Has taken pleasure in belittling people with that kind of stuff that he used to do, where he tried to shake hands with managers before the end of games and things like that when his teams were winning. I mean, for him to ask for respect is a joke, frankly, and he has our respect. I think all of us. He has our respect as a manager. To go back to his point, he is one of the greatest managers there's ever been in club football. He's one of the greatest managers of all time. His record speaks for itself. He's won the Champions League with different clubs. He's won leagues in different countries. He's managed great teams. He's been a great manager. But as Martin Samuel wrote, I think, in the Daily Mail, it's nobody gets a lap of honour as a manager, and his demands for respect are laughable. As if we're talking in the scheme of things, his demand, he has our respect as a manager, but as a person, I think not.
They played Burnley this afternoon. Steve Bates says that Mourinho's future will be decided, hangs on their Champions League campaign. Of course, they lost to Sevilla last season, booed off the field when they lost at home in that second leg. If they lose at Burnley today, what do you think the outcome will be? That will be three on the spin: Brighton, Tottenham, then Burnley.
Personally, I don't think they will lose at Burnley, by the way, but I do think even if they did, I still think they would stick with him. I think it's really interesting that basically United, for all the criticism, and rightly so, of the performances on the pitch, and indeed the soul searching that is written and examined about Ed Woodward, they are still a remarkably successful football club from a financial point of view. Incredible profits, incredible earnings, incredible status within the game. And like it or loathe it, I think Mourinho is still an incredible figurehead. As Ollie rightly says, he's one of the greatest managers of all time. His decision at the moment, his pontifications about living in the past, take some swallowing. But I don't think that a panic will be a panic decision will be made. And I do actually think that probably, I'm sure that Steve Bates is very good, and basically always well informed. And I do, think that that makes an awful lot of sense, judge him on the Champions League campaign. Because let's be honest, I think the Premier League is already looking out of United's grasp. But if they could do well in the Champions League, then that might save Mourinho again. Everything that you look in recent times, the Mourinho, the short-term contract extension, the sort of lack of business perhaps of what he wanted to be done, smacks of a football club not knowing quite what to do in the longer term, and that relationship with Mourinho and Woodward. I mean, Charlie Sale and the Daily Mail wrote the other day that their relationship is according to his sources, very, very good, and sort of very jovial and very good. Elsewhere in the papers, it's examined as being very bad. So I do think that ultimately it'll be results on the pitch, and I think that the Champions League might be the more reliable barometer than the Premier League this season for Mourinho.
Threats of banners in protesting against Ed Woodward, the executive vice chairman, today up at Turf Moor. We've seen that kind of behaviour before with Wenger's regime, or Wenger's reign when it was coming to an end. West Brom, notably, West Brom away. That stuff, of course, is never very helpful. But does Woodward? He's in the firing line, but does he deserve to be blamed?
He does. I think the banner planned today is Ed Woodward specialist in failure. So that references the fact that he's been the man in charge since Ferguson left, and you'd have to say there's 5 years or whatever it is. There's been no thread of clear, kind of convincing planning taking place. To me, Moyes wasn't his appointment, so his two managerial appointments are two famous names whose best years arguably were in the past, Van Gaal and then Mourinho. The targets he's gone after are people like Ronaldo or they signed Zlatan, Schweinsteiger. It does look like a club or it's lurching from sort of big name to big name, and looking at people who are maybe household names but better years ago. And what they're not doing is finding the stars of the future. They're not ahead of the game anymore, the way that City are, the way that Liverpool are signing players, the way that Chelsea signed Jorginho. They're not doing those things. But there's a lot happening at United.
Ronaldo would be the classic example of that, wouldn't it?
Yeah,
under Sir Alex Ferguson when they initially signed him.
18, yeah. It would almost been a parody if they'd then signed Ronaldo for 100 million at the age of 33 or whatever. There is a lot happening. I think Woodward has realised at last that he needs some expertise on the football side. He's looking at a director of football. The fact that he knocked Mourinho back over transfers was bad for Mourinho, and I would sympathise if Mourinho would then argue that his legs have been cut off in terms of planning. They have. He didn't get what he needed. But what was good that came out of it from a United point of view was Woodward saying we should be focused on younger players again. We shouldn't be signing Diego Godin. We shouldn't be signing Alderweireld at the age of nearly 30. We should be signing Varane at 22, 23. And I think that's a good thing for Manchester United long term,
except that
if they
can't
pursue
get
it.
Varane.
Except that,
and there is one of the other things I think with Woodward's reign, and again you would know this better than me, but they've been played quite a lot. I feel United. They've been played a lot in the transfer market. We've had a succession of stories over the years that he's been in charge, where they've been after a player,
Bale,
they think they're going Sergio Ramos.
Fabregas.
I remember in particular, and then lo and behold, the player signs a new contract for his club. I know that happens in the game, but it seems to have happened an awful lot to Manchester United, and for a club that is one of the biggest clubs in the world, for that to happen so often is embarrassing, really.
Yeah, sure. OK. Tough times ahead for Jose Mourinho and Manchester United. They played Burnley this afternoon. The game live on Sky, of course, is Watford against Tottenham. Tottenham beat United earlier on in the week. Crossy and I will be at Vicarage Road a little bit later. OK, next up, we're going to talk international football. It's Gareth Southgate named his first squad since the World Cup semi-final for the games against Spain and Switzerland on Thursday. We'll talk about that. That's coming up next. England squad announced on Thursday. Gareth Southgate largely loyal to the players who made it to the World Cup semi-final against Croatia in the summer, Crossy. Was that the right thing to do? Because, of course, the buzz in the build-up to that had been that Phil Foden, 8 minutes in a Manchester City shirt in the Premier League this season, would be in the squad. Jadon Sancho, Of course, there's a lot of talk about Declan Rice at West Ham at the moment as well, Republic of Ireland player, but Southgate trying to persuade him to change allegiance. Were you surprised, or is this the right call?
I think it's the right call. I thought the only one that really, out of the younger names, sort of touted really for the squad, Foden, I just think, as you refer to, I just don't think he's played enough minutes. You absolutely have to, I think, use that as a gauge. I mean, Sessegnon was actually sort of, was taken out, wasn't he, the weekend before the squad was named. He's, those two guys are clearly going to be mainstays of the England squad in the future. I don't know if you can justify that. Sancho is interesting because he's obviously played more minutes, albeit obviously in Germany he's had to go there to get game time, and massive credit to him for doing so as well. I thought it was really, it's a great thing for his career. But generally, I think it's absolutely the right thing to do, to stay loyal. I think that's good to show the rewards, I think, to a squad which massively overachieved and delighted a whole nation, but also build on that camaraderie. I mean, obviously there's been a couple of high-profile withdrawals, isn't there, with Gary Cahill and Jamie Vardy. Vardy, that one really surprised me, I must say, because I think the rags to riches story was still worth pursuing, even at 31 years of age. I think he had a very sensible conversation with Ashley Young, which is basically, I'm not saying, you're out all the time, and Ashley Young certainly didn't want to retire, as a way of getting back Luke Shaw, who I think Luke Shaw, of the very few positives of Man United's start to the season, he's certainly been one of them. So I think it was absolutely right. I mean, we shouldn't underestimate these games. I mean, it's difficult, isn't it, to kind of grasp the whole Nations League. It will be interesting to see when we can get into the whole crux of it. I have read and studied it so much and still trying to get to grips with it. It's a competitive game that we're talking about. So we should not be sort of handing out caps as sort of, thanks and, good luck for the future to some of these boys. If they're not ready, it's a competitive game. And I do think it was the right thing to do. So he's had to make a couple of changes. Interesting to see Tarkowski back. I think the goalkeepers thing is an issue. Alex McCarthy was a very obvious call-up and the right thing to do, because I don't think you can look back now. And Gareth Southgate's message about English players and young players needing to play and a lack of game time is extremely worrying, I think, for the future of our game. And his message absolutely must be taken seriously. I was really pleased that message got taken so seriously. It was on the majority of the back pages, and it's a warning for clubs.
England are looking a little bit light up front. Harry Kane, fine, OK, he's in good form, scoring for Tottenham. Marcus Rashford, substitute at Manchester United. And Danny Welbeck, substitute, came on last week and scored, of course, for Arsenal, didn't he? But without Vardy, England have got three strikers. England have got three forwards, two of them on the bench for their Premier League clubs. Yeah,
and Sturridge, who's had a great pre-season, isn't going to get in the Liverpool team by the looks of things. That is the area of concern, because when you think of the World Cup, it was based on set pieces, it was based on being hard and obdurate in terms of the three at the back, but it wasn't a lot of action around the box. I think it was Saudi Arabia had as many shots on target as England or whatever. With that in mind, I think James Maddison's a bit unlucky to. I don't know what Ollie thought about him yesterday, but I think he's a really interesting player, a little bit different to what England have got. I thought he was a little bit unlucky to miss out. I also wonder if it's time to go three up front, because if you look at how effective Raheem Sterling is for Man City, and he scored a great goal again yesterday, then that's a source of goals that England have got to start sort of tapping into. So there's plenty to improve on, despite reaching the World Cup semi-final. Ross Bartley's another who I thought might have been brought back in, but there were no sort of stunts or surprises by Gareth in the squad, which is his style, really, isn't it?
What's happening with Raheem? Because he scored again. He scored for Manchester City yesterday. He scored in the opening day of the season, didn't he? Opening weekend of the season against Arsenal. You wrote in the week about Real Madrid will be monitoring continue to monitor him. Will be at the game, the Spain game when England play at Wembley Stadium. What is the difference in terms of the culture between club and country?
Well, it would be interesting, wouldn't it? I mean, I think personally too much was made, I think, about Sterling and sort of World Cup and performances, because I felt looking on, I thought he had a really, really good World Cup. And you sometimes look at social media and the sort of, I don't know, some of the backlash from people. Well, it's not the barometer of the whole nation saying that. I think sometimes we have to separate that from the Twitter bile and stuff like that. Sterling, I think, it had a really good World Cup as part of a really successful England team. And the way he has started this season has been astonishing. It's a different, many times it's a different role on the left. We thought it was a completely strange one opening day of the season against Arsenal, and maybe he was used to target Arsenal frailties down that side. But yesterday, cutting in again from the left, that goal brilliantly struck. He is making himself absolutely irresistible, and he's into the final 2 years of his contract. He couldn't be doing it at a better time in terms of contract negotiations, because make no mistake about it, he's every bit Manchester City's main man right now. He's playing fantastically well. He's embraced his sort of almost head start of carrying on last season's form and fitness into this season, and he looks absolutely sensational. We are talking about, I think, at the moment, one of the very best 3, if not 5 players in Europe. He's absolutely on fire at the moment for City, and you know, it's interesting, isn't it, that Sane is struggling in amongst the places to even make the bench. Now, I think at the start of last season, people might be saying, well, it might be Sterling for as the full guy. Well, Sterling is making himself undroppable. He's absolutely on fire and one of the most exciting players right now in the Premier League, bar none. You
used to say that about Jack Wilshere as well. He's in reprieve on the back page of the Sunday Mirror this morning. He's still got a shot at playing for England, according to Gareth Southgate. Not in this squad, though. I'd like to move on that point. Jack Wilshere now playing for West Ham. And we need to mention West Ham because they're appalling start to the season. It's 4 successive defeats for them in the Premier League under Manuel Pellegrini. Of course, they beat AFC Wimbledon in the Carabao Cup in the week. But notwithstanding that, it's 4 defeats. Where do they turn to? What do they do from here, Ollie?
Well, I think they'll be okay, because I think they've got enough quality. I think they, you know, obviously it's a terrible start, and I know that they've been poor. Saw the highlights of the game yesterday. I think they brought a lot of new players in who are struggling to gel. I've never been a massive fan of Pellegrini, but I think that's more just a sort of charisma thing or lack of it. But I think the signings are okay. I mean, I thought, again, I've only seen highlights, but Felipe Anderson looks like a proper player to me, and Arnautovic obviously has been struggling a little bit, but I mean, he's a good forward. They've got enough quality. I think they've made some other good signings. They've got enough quality in the side. I think they'll be okay. And look, I'm not a fan of the West Ham regime. And I think they've made a dog's dinner of the last few years on and off the pitch. But I think they'll recover from this.
Yeah.
I think it's a matter of time. I don't see that. I think there are enough other, even if this is damning with faint praise, I think there are enough other poor sides in the division this year that they'll climb out of it.
Yeah, okay. Tough times for West Ham. 4 successive defeats in the Premier League. They're struggling with their new manager, Manuel Pellegrini. John, it's 20 to 11.
Yeah.
How are you going to get to Celtic Park for 12? It's a big game on today.
Two
Rangers.
little teams, that one.
Two little teams. Don't say that to Brendan Rodgers and Steven Gerrard this morning. More on those two coming next. Welcome back. The papers south of the border giving Celtic and Rangers due prominence this morning because they play high noon showdown at Celtic Park, John. Can we just try and paint the scenery, the landscape of Scottish football now that Brendan Rodgers and Steven Gerrard clash as managers of these two great clubs?
Yeah, I mean, it's been an extraordinary sort of 2 or 3 years of the whole scene being rebooted in Scotland, which has come from nowhere really. But you know, going back to 2 or 3 years ago, I think you had a dominant Celtic, but not particularly good Celtic under Ronnie Dahlia, and Rangers were still down the divisions, sort of recovering from their bankruptcy, and you know, teams like Aberdeen were doing well, but there was a little bit of excitement gone from the scene, I suppose. And to be here now, 2 years later, 3 years later, with Celtic having been built so impressively by Brendan Rodgers, won 2 trebles in a row, on an absolute sort of crest coming into this season. I've then had almost a Manchester United summer where Rodgers has been falling out with the chief executive over transfers. Players are unhappy. They've just lost Moussa Dembele. There's suddenly a lot of noise and soap opera around Celtic. And then enter on the blue side Steven Gerrard at Rangers, who, if ever there was a figure who's made for the old firm rivalry, for derbies, for that competitive element, it's Steven Gerrard. You think about him at Liverpool in games against Manchester United, getting sent off after 38 seconds, but also playing brilliantly in many of them. His record in Mersey derbies, lots of red cards, but lots of goals, lots of winning goals. He's a competitive beast, and he's made for this. And he started this season brilliantly. Rangers are one of only 4 teams out of 64 to go from the preliminary rounds of the Europa League all the way to the Europa League proper. It's been a great sort of journey for him. He's signed really well, and coming into this game, speaking to lads up north, Steven's the one that sounds confident. He's the one that sounds mature and assured, almost the veteran of these fixtures, and it's Rodgers that's under pressure and a little bit in doubt. I mean, Celtic have still got a better team than Rangers, that has to be said. But I think under Steven, Rangers have covered so much ground so quickly that there's a feeling they can not only do something in today's game, but they can do something across this season, which would have sounded ridiculous back in May with Celtic about to win their 6th title out of 6. And another thing Gerrard's done is he's brought players back into that Rangers fold who will thrive on derbies. Alan McGregor, Kyle Lafferty. He's brought people in like John Flanagan, competitive beasts, guys that will do well. It'll be pandemonium today. It'll be absolute madness, and it's a 12 o'clock kickoff. Because the pubs won't be open long enough. I remember they tried that game at 5 o'clock once, and there were fans jumping off the top tier of the stand at Celtic Park. The referee getting coined and absolute chaos. And I don't think they've ever tried another late kickoff. So.
No, it doesn't seem wise to go back down that road, does it? If that sort of carry on is happening. Crossy, are Rodgers and Gerrard, are they being diplomatic in terms of their relationship? Rodgers, of course, his manager at Anfield for a period. Brendan Rodgers spoke about, we're still friends, but we haven't had a chance to meet each other in Glasgow just yet. We're very busy. I've got my thing going on. Stephen's got his. Gerrard said in the Sunday Times today, everybody wants there to be a problem between us. They want a UFC match on the side. Is that a more accurate reflection?
I think it probably is, really. I do think that their relationship at Liverpool, and basically Brendan Rodgers came in and nearly worked an absolute miracle. He came within a whisker, didn't he, of winning the title, and it would have been the biggest and best achievement by a British manager, in Premier League era.
Are you saying he's blaming Steven Gerrard? Blaming Steven Gerrard for the slip against Chelsea?
I just felt that Gerrard, his swan song was that season, and clearly Gerrard was an absolute central part of that campaign. And then you are talking about the following year having to move on one of the greatest players in Liverpool's history. I just thought that Gerrard was always going to be upset, always going to be hurt, and it was going to be such an impossible situation to manage that I think that the fact that they can sort of deny that there isn't a little bit of spice and a bit of tension between the two of them would be nonsense, because you are talking about one of the greats in Steven Gerrard, and Brendan Rodgers having to do the unthinkable about moving him on. Well, it adds to the spice, and it's brilliant, I think, for Celtic and Rangers that, frankly, you have got those two characters. Jamie Carragher did a brilliant column, I thought, in the Telegraph yesterday, sort of painting this picture of how, it was a great sort of anecdote to kick it off with. Basically, the first time that Carragher ever met Brendan Rodgers, he says he offered him a job, and the second time that he met him, he told him, no, sorry, that one's gone. I've promoted Mike Marsh from the academy. I hate to think what the third meeting was. But basically, he was actually incredibly generous to Rodgers, and rightly so, saying that he is the best British manager, best British coach right now, beyond all doubt. And that basically he can see in Gerrard, his great pal, of course, a man who could eventually eclipse him as the best British coach. The signs that Gerrard has already put up, and I think that the fact is that Gerrard will be inspired that little bit much more if he needed to be by the fact that he's taken on that kind of spice with Brendan Rodgers. I think we'll just give him that little bit more edge. The way he started, Gerrard, at Rangers has been phenomenal. To go through the other night, finishing the game with 9 men.
Yeah.
I mean, we talk about kind of doubts about Gerrard as a young manager, whether he's got it tactically. Well, there's your answer. He's absolutely got it. And he's got power, he's got desire. I just feel with Brendan Rodgers, his time at Celtic is surely coming to an end. And I hope that he will get a really top job in England, because he deserves it. What he's done at Celtic overall has been phenomenal.
You went to see him, of course, didn't you? At the end of last season.
And I feel a little bit sorry for him in all this. I mean, Johnny's given us their recent history of the sort of issues he's faced over the summer and the way that it appears. There are tensions that have crept into that relationship. But I do feel he's been underrated a little bit, really, not just for what he's achieved at Celtic, which has been phenomenal, even by the standards of dominance in Scottish football. But as John said, also for what he achieved at Liverpool, that seems to be denigrated somehow now, and people say, well, he had Luis Suarez or whatever. But I mean, he did a terrific job, absolutely terrific job at Liverpool, and I think I'm surprised that John and I talked about this a lot. I'm surprised that he wasn't more higher up in people's thoughts when some of the jobs came up during the summer, particularly the Arsenal job. I mean, I thought he would have been an excellent fit for the Arsenal job. I sometimes feel that he doesn't get the respect that he deserves, and I think it's interesting that a character like Gerrard is such a big character, somebody that everybody admires, we all admire, and he's the kind of guy who can have a transformative effect on a club. Clearly appears to be doing that already, and I think, again, that adds to my sense that Rodgers sometimes doesn't quite get the respect that he needs.
Yeah, sure, OK. Well, he has done a good job, there's no doubt about that, up at Celtic Park with Celtic over the last couple of years. OK, that's all we've got time for today, unfortunately, chaps. Thanks very much to Ollie for joining us this morning, to John and to John Cross as well. You're going to Vicarage Road. What about the Arsenal? I didn't even get to Mesut Ozil with you as well. I don't know.
Had to move on.